Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today I'm bringing you back an old favorite, and that is Games I Wish Got Fan Translated, and it's part 13. So it's been about a year since I've done the last one, which was the huge one where I talked about 20 games, but this time we're going back to basics by talking about 10 more. And of course, just like every part, I have to explain that yes, I don't expect all these games to happen anytime soon as they are super obscure, and there might be some that are not necessarily the best games you'll ever play, but they are at the very least interesting to me that I would like to play them one day. And besides, talking about these games that literally nobody else is talking about is always a fun time, even if I can only say like so much about each and every one, but it's still very fun to talk about. So let's just get right to it. So the first game we're going to be talking about here happens to be a game on the Nintendo DS, and that is Sakura Note. So this is a pretty unique game that in some ways does kind of remind me of something that the game company Sing would make. You know, the same company that made games like Glass Rose and Hotel Dusk, where it is mostly a story-driven game with a lot of dialogue, and there's a lot of different things you can do with the dialogue, where you get many outcomes with talking to different NPCs, and of course, depending on which ones you do, then you can get different endings and such. But as for the main story itself, so you play as a little kid who first moves into a town, and then he ends up meeting a girl, and she's being targeted by a bunch of ghosts, and there is a cherry blossom tree that is set right in the middle between two different towns. And you gotta solve the mystery within it, and that's the basis of what I can say about it. Of course, I haven't played this game, and I don't want to look too much into it before playing it, so, you know, there's not gonna be any spoiler stuff. But still, even just with that alone, it does sound somewhat interesting. And the game has a pretty nice graphical art style for the DS, and also the game's music was composed by Nobu Uematsu, so that's actually really fucking cool. And apparently there was some thought about bringing this game over here back in the day, but unfortunately the people at Ignition Entertainment said that the game was not Western enough. Well, if that was the problem, then couldn't they just put, like, a cowboy hat on the main character's head or something? Well, all joking aside, this one does look like a pretty interesting one. Alright, and the next one we got here is that we're moving on to the 3DS. Although it is also on the Vita, but, you know, most people tend to not remember that system. So, the next one we're talking about is Exteria. So this is a turn-based RPG where the battle system, you got a front row and a back row, and the game's setting kind of has a fantasy mixed with future, so kind of like the Tales of games, and I actually do find that this game almost does kind of look like one if it was a turn-based game. And the one weird thing about this game, and I don't really know how to explain it, but apparently the main character has a ability to kiss things, and he can absorb energy from it. Yeah, I have no idea, and not many sites really talk about this game and don't really mention a whole much about it, but all I thought about was this game inspired by a tulip on PS2? So yeah, it has a pretty weird gimmick about it, and I guess that does make it kind of funny and amusing, I guess. I mean, there was a lot of games around this time of 2013 that came out that had some weird gimmicks like that, so I guess it's not the weirdest thing ever. Oh, and speaking of weird things, in the year 2018, the game was delisted from the digital stores because the company did not want to renew the license for the opening theme song. Well, not like it really matters anymore because the 3DS store is dead now, but this is one of those games that was not available for very long, which is kinda sad. So yeah, if this one ever did get a fan translation with emulation, because I feel like that's really going to be the best way of playing it now, well, I wouldn't mind trying it. Alright, next up we have is a PS2 game, and that happens to be, okay, well, hard name to pronounce coming up, it's Tensho Gakin Genshiroku. And first thing I have to mention is that it actually has a pretty cool looking cover. So yes, this happens to be a visual novel slash tactical RPG, so very similar to Sakura Wars. In fact, this game is very much like that in the sense that it has a lot of like relationship systems as well, while also mixed with the tactical RPG formula. And the set piece in this game is really nice looking too. It has like an old Japan setting, but I really like the game's art style. I really love the game's backgrounds. I also really like the character designs as well. It all just looks really nice, and from what little I heard of the music, it's actually pretty damn good. Although I should also mention too that there are other games in the series, and yeah, as you would expect, some of them do have names that are also really hard to say, and there's even one that has literally almost the same name. But yes, this game takes place in the same universe as the Tokyo Majin Gakin series, so the most well-known game in the series that actually did come out over here was Kowloon High School Chronicles, which is a game I actually did talk about in one of my, old episodes. So yeah, I found another game that's kind of related to it, and it's kind of interesting that I actually found out more about this series as the years go on, because I always just thought it was just that one game and that was it. But yeah, this one definitely does look really cool. And next up, we're going to be talking about a Super Nintendo game, because yes, there are still plenty of other Super Nintendo games that have yet to receive a fan translation, and this one happens to be Wondrous Magic. And look at that box art, that is just beautiful. Yeah, that was the first thing that got my attention with this game, and I was like, oh hey, a cool looking Super Nintendo game that has not received a fan translation yet. Well, it's time for me to talk about it. So this does seem to be a pretty typical fantasy RPG where you have first-person battles, which are apparently done in real time, which is kinda neat. And I also find that some of the backgrounds in this game are pretty nice looking too. I kinda like some of the textures here. And I also like the art style within the game's cutscenes as well. And that's the extent of my knowledge on this game, unfortunately. I wish I could talk more about it, but I suppose I can also mention too that someone does have a guide up on GameFAQs on the game, so if you do want to play this one sometime soon, well, there is that. Alright, next up, we got ourselves a very weird one here, and on a very weird platform, and that happens to be Victorian Park on Macintosh. Yeah, first time we're talking about a Mac game, although this game was also released on the Apple Pippin as well, if you could believe it. So yes, this is a first-person adventure game where it takes place at a theme park at night where you're trying to rescue some twins that got stuck within the theme park, and you gotta interact with these really weird characters. And yeah, as you can tell with this game, yeah, this is a very strange-looking game, and I actually really dig the look of it. But it is worth noting that this game does have a couple English text in the game, like there is some yes and no options that are in English, but it's the dialogue in this game that is all in Japanese. So if someone wanted to work on this game, they'd either have to put in some subtitles or create an English dub for the game. So yeah, I can definitely say this is probably one of the weirdest Macintosh games that I've ever found, and I gotta say, it actually looks really damn cool. But before we move on, I do want to mention one interesting fact, is that this game was actually ran on the same engine as a game called Dust, A Tale of the Wired West. And that's a game I actually grew up playing way back in the day, and when I rediscovered it, when looking up this game, I was like, holy shit, that's the cowboy game that I used to play. Because I always used to think that the game I played was Outlaws, the first-person shooting game, but it didn't have that red cowboy guy in the corner. But when I found this game, well, there he was, and I was like, damn, so the game was here all along. So anyways, that's all I have to say about that. I just thought it was just really fun and interesting that I rediscovered a game from my childhood by finding out about, this Victorian Park game. Also, just as an added bonus, as I don't know how much I'll be talking about Macintosh games in the future, but another one that I think would be cool to play in English one day is Samurai Mech 2. Yeah, it's an RPG with samurai mechs. Need I say more? Alright, next up we're going to be talking about a PC98 game, because of course it's me that has to talk about PC98 games, and that happens to be Isaku. So this is a visual novel adventure game from the company Elf, the same people that did and also just like that game, it has some really awesome, well-detailed graphics, while also having some really nice sounding music. And the game has a pretty interesting concept to it, for that it actually does have a bit of a horror feel to it. So you play as a student who gets kidnapped and is stuck in a building and just trying to get out. And some of the other people that are stuck there with him are some of his classmates, so yeah, it's pretty simple concept, but I really like stuff like that. I mean, there's a reason why I love games like Zero Escape and all that. And apparently this game does not have that much adult content in it, so I find that to be kind of refreshing for a PC98 game. Though of course it still has its fan service moments, but it's nowhere near on the same level as many other games on the platform. But still, like I said, really like the way it looks, likes the way it sounds, and I also really like the concept of it. And I think it actually does look like a pretty interesting one. And next on here is going to be a game on the Dreamcast, which I have not talked about a Dreamcast game in one of these videos in a while, and that happens to be Tricolor Cries. So this is an RPG where you play as a bunch of females and you gotta run a town or something. Like, apparently the whole point of the game is that you're trying to figure out who's gonna become the next master of the town, and there's like 6 guardians, and apparently one of them gets sealed away by like an evil demon who's trying to like destroy the world or something. You know, the usual stuff, and yeah. Gotta love my great description right there, but seriously guys, like, I'm really trying hard to, like, talk about these games, but it's really hard when there's not a lot of websites that talk about it. Like, most websites will just be like, this is an RPG on the Dreamcast. Like, no shit it is. But yeah, apparently there's also some item crafting in the game, and there is, like, a schedule thing, so that kind of makes me think of, like, the Atelier game, so that's kind of neat, I guess. And the graphics in this game does look very cutesy looking, but it also does kind of remind me of a lot of other RPGs around the time on the Dreamcast, like Skies of Arcadia and Grandia 2. And I really do like the bright colors of the game's backgrounds. So yeah, that's all I can say about it, unfortunately, but still, it's cool to find another RPG on the Dreamcast that I never knew existed until recent years. Alright, next up we're taking a look at a very weird PS2 game, and that happens to be Okuki, or Okuki? I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Okuki, because I think that's what the name of a servant for the Shogun is called. But yeah, look at that box art. Now that is also a beautiful work of art. So yeah, this is a game of a very interesting concept where you play as a servant girl who was supposed to go to death, but then she ends up escaping death, but now wants to seek revenge by trying to assassinate some of the higher-ups without getting caught in unique ways. And because of this game almost kind of reminds me of like a deception game, or another game made by the same company as this game, Aku Daikan. Yes, this is Global A. So concept alone there, pretty damn interesting, and I'm all for it. Although one thing I should mention about this game that I should be wareful is that apparently on Famitsu back in the day, this game was rated pretty damn badly, so there is a chance that this game might actually suck. But then again, there are some games out there that have been reviewed poorly online that are actually a lot better than what they were given credit for, so, you know, maybe this might be one of those cases too, who knows. But either way, I still find it to be a very interesting concept of a game, and, you know, even if the game ends up being kinda crappy, well, maybe this might inspire someone to make a game similar, but better. But the fact that this game is made by the same company that put out games like Aku Daikan, though, that has to count for something, because that series, man, is just so wild, and I love it. Alright, and the next game I'm going to be talking about here is a game that's on a bunch of different platforms, and that happens to be Alshark. And I don't expect this game to have any sharks in it, unless this game happens to have sharks in space, which would be kinda awesome. Well anyways, so this is a space-themed RPG that actually looks really damn cool, and like I said, this game is on a bunch of different platforms, such as the PC-98, the FM Towns, the Sharp X68000, the Sega CD, and the PC Engine CD. And all these versions do look really good, but there are some versions that do look better than others, and yeah, this might surprise you, but the PC-98 version is not my favorite looking version of the game. Yeah, my favorite looking one happens to be the Sharp 68000 and the Sega CD. I think those ones just look the coolest because they still have that really nice looking heads-up display that I really like, while also having some really nice bright colors. And you can have up to 5 characters in your party, and there's different solar systems and worlds that you get to travel to. And apparently you can fight both on land and in ships, too. And apparently you can do any of these worlds in any order you want, so yeah, this game seems to be pretty massive for a space-themed RPG at the time. And it definitely reminds me in a lot of ways of Phantasy Star and Cosmic Star Fantasy. And I'd be perfectly okay with any version of this game getting fan-translated, but like I said earlier, the Sharp 68000 and the Sega CD one are my favorite looking versions, but I'd be perfectly okay with any other one. Alright, and finally, as for the final game I'm gonna mention in this part, happens to be a PC game, and it is Vampire Hurts. Because it hurts to be a vampire. Well, I mean, you know, you can't go out in the sunlight, you can't eat garlic. Yeah, so that means no more garlic bread. So yeah, that would hurt. So yeah, this was a PC game that was released in 2002, and it's a top-down action-adventure game, and apparently it's kind of similar to Zelda, where it has real-time combat, but also having some problem-solving, and there is also some dungeon stuff you gotta do. And the story concept for the game sounds kind of interesting too, where that apparently it's about playing as a little kid who happens to be one of the last humans on Earth, and he ends up befriending a vampire girl named Stella. And as you can see, the game has a really nice looking gothic anime style, which I think looks really great. In fact, I'm sure there are some people that are looking at this and thinking that it looks like the anime Frozen Maiden, and yeah, I can definitely see it in some aspects. And also, just like the last game that I talked about, this one also has a really nice looking UI that is very fancy looking, and I really love that. And from what I heard of the music of this game, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Growlancer 1 and some of the really old Falcom games, which I think is really great. And one interesting thing that I just found out about was that apparently this game was going to get a Steam greenlight at some point, but unfortunately it just never came through, which is a shame because, damn it, this is a game I really would love to play. So that's all the ones I'm going to be talking about today. So as always, what are some games that I've talked about in here that look really interesting to you, or ones that I haven't talked about yet that you think deserve a fan translation at some point, or even an official one that maybe could happen, because weirder things have happened before. And like I said in the last big video that I did before, I don't want to do too many of these videos because, I mean, first of all, we have like 13 parts. Like, I mean, I think that's quite a lot there. And secondly, I don't want to come off as like, you know, like begging and like asking people like too much because, you know, I understand that all this shit is like really hard work to do that isn't gonna happen in like a couple days. So I think for the next one that I will do is that I think I'm going to talk about some of the games that have been fan translated that I have talked about in my various different parts and kind of talk a little bit more about them if I have played them enough, because there are some that I definitely have. So with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.